Hey everybody, Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. Today we're going to talk about something that we all probably do as public relations practitioners. I was doing it for years, but until the three people on with me today introduced the actual topics of curiosity and empathy and how they make PR possible, I didn't really know how I was doing it. And so what we're going to talk about today is how these three people can show the rest of us how to make curiosity and empathy really the heart of what we do in PR, because as Lizzy has described, PR is all about people. And if you forget that, you're not really going to be successful. So Lizzy and Joshua and Reid, if you could introduce yourselves and how curiosity and empathy are part of your overall, business strategy and how you interact with the people involved in PR.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to kick it off. So I'm Lizzy. I'm the founder and CEO, the co-founder and the CEO of the CoLab. We're a B2B tech PR firm. So thinking about curiosity and empathy, this really leads, I would say, every single facet of everything that we do, right? Beginning at targeting clients to work with, it takes curiosity and empathy to understand what they're looking for in a partner and really what drives their goals, what would be a meaningful relationship to them. Curiosity and empathy play a tremendous role in the way that we work with our team members at the CoLab. Everyone hails from different backgrounds and everyone always has different things going on. So it's important to be able to relate to them on that level. Obviously, pitching media, you know, it's not about what you want to say. It's about what the media's audience wants to hear. And it's important that you lead with curiosity and empathy in that way by digging into sort of their stories and their audience and their interests. And then also just the day-to-day work with clients, right? Similar to the team, everyone works in different ways and everyone comes from different places. And until you can really put yourself in someone else's shoes via curiosity and empathy, it's really hard to see a different perspective other than your own.
I'll go next. I'm Joshua. I'm a storyteller, primarily in the healthcare industry, but overall, I look at myself as a storyteller in life of the cultural zeitgeist. I help companies create and tell the story of how they're solving the world's greatest challenges, and primarily that's in healthcare. And that inherently requires both curiosity and empathy. I think the questions, how and why do you do that, have to be my most frequently spoken word in the business setting. But empathy and curiosity, for me at least, are human first functions, meaning before you can even think about how do you apply them in business, you have to master them in daily life simply for the sake of just being a good human and being an interesting person. I think curiosity is data. It fuels what we do as communicators. The more curious you are, the more probing questions you ask, the more you discover, and that improves your strategy. And I think there's nothing that we can't conquer with curiosity. If you have that unrelenting desire to understand what drives the behaviors of the people around you and the choices that they make, then you can better connect with your customers. And if you're in the communications industry, especially if you're on the agency side in a client service function, curiosity it's the cost of entry. It's catalyzing client relationships and finding a solution to their problem. And as a storyteller, working with, especially in healthcare, working with CEOs and scientists who know the science but can't really crystallize it into a layperson's definition, being curious is what gets you to a point of being able to tell an effective story. And empathy is about being a hero to those people, but it's doing so in a way that you don't really seem like one. You're kind of understanding what the other person needs. And in the case of healthcare communications, they need a clear story, and being able to help them fix their problem without telling them you're fixing their problem by putting it in a perspective of you're solving a bigger picture challenge rather than making yourself the hero. That to me is the hallmark of empathy.
My name is Reid Wegley. I am a fractional PR director, and I work with innovative companies in the tech space, the building and agricultural and architectural space, in addition to organic foods and renewable energies. And so I'm pretty spread across the board, but the focus is innovation. And so it always has been. And that's where my curiosity lies and comes in. that's what got me into this business, was curiosity about how this business works, how the media works, but then also how companies position themselves and earn credibility. And so the empathy piece of the pie is much bigger. It really encapsulates PR strategy, it encapsulates client strategy, sales, everything, because basically what we do in PR, whether we're selling to a journalist or we're selling to a potential client, is trying to understand what their needs are and how to best meet those needs. And if you don't have empathy, you can't see that. And you can't understand what your strengths and weaknesses are too, in terms of your team. So empathy has always been there for me in terms of a tactic and a strategy. In the last few years, I think it's grown just because of the understanding of the difficulty of the pitch today. It's not quite as easy as it used to be. And so it takes quite a bit more understanding of what that journalist is looking for in terms of trying to meet it and fit it. And so that's where at least I'm spending a lot more time on the research end, where we used to research back 3 to 6 months. Now I'm going back 2 years on some of these journalists just to make sure I'm tracking what they want. And that's a real study. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. But if you don't apply that strategy, you'll never get it right.
Back March, a post about being curious. Reid, excuse me, yeah, March, and then Joshua, you and I were doing our show back about storytelling, and you mentioned empathy. Or excuse me, you mentioned curiosity, and then Reid, you and I were talking, and you mentioned empathy, and I thought, I'm for more left brain, right? I use an insurance analogy to reassure my wife that I love her. It's true. And I use an asymptote analogy to break up with a young lady. Yes, we're still friends. So I was like, oh, curiosity, like this, it didn't strike me at first. And I realized our first B2B client 5 years ago, the only reason we were able to work with them was because they're a financial lender. On the surface, they said they were boring. But when we dug deeper, we realized that what they're really doing is providing money to small business owners who are over their head, who don't have money and don't have business knowledge and couldn't qualify for a bank loan. And they have to hold on to a net 90 or net 180 payment from the government. And so I realized that asking the right questions and really diving deep and having curiosity about what they do and empathy for their clients. Not right now, please. I don't care. Bye. I actually do care, I promise. Was really more than I realized. But but I was missing it there as sort of like a systematic approach. And so, Joshua, you said it's all about really like people at the heart. Is this something that you've had to develop, or is it something that you sort of recognized when you were much younger that sort of helped launch you into PR and communications?
Probably recognized when I was younger. I didn't take a direct route into PR and comms. I started my career in the radio industry. So winding up in PR was sort of like turning to the dark side, at least as far as broadcast media folks are concerned. But I think that, you grow up, and it's a sort of a nature versus nurture question. You grow up and you become an empathetic person. You become somebody who cares about the needs of others and prioritizes that before the needs of your own. And that's what I think makes you empathetic. Like, I was working with a junior colleague once in a large pharma environment, and I could just tell that they were unclear about something. And sitting in a meeting, it was pretty obvious that they were too nervous to ask a question. We were around all the corporate bigwigs, the C-suite, and you could just tell that there was a little bit of an intimidation factor. And I think what was empathetic in the way I handled the situation was I asked the question that I had a hunch was on their mind. And it wasn't bad for me to look like I didn't know, but I showed my junior colleague, well, here's a senior leader who also didn't know. And they immediately felt a little bit better about themselves. And I never told them I did this for you. That's empathy. That's kind of taking the onus onto yourself and becoming that hero that we were talking about in our last session together, and being something that somebody needs in the moment because you understand that they need it. To me, that's empathy.
And Reid, when you talk about the last few years, you've become more empathetic. Um, you've described yourself as a bulldog, I think, a couple of times to me. How do you stay sort of diving in and accomplishing the client's goal while still becoming more empathetic? How do you make that balance work?
I don't know that I've really become more empathetic. I think I always had it inside me. Um, I was a non-traditional entry into PR as well, coming out of school as a creative writing student. And so I had to get internships in order to get into the business. And that's an act of empathy to try and understand the business on the fly. A couple of years later, I was working for a tech PR firm in Boulder, Colorado, and probably the top tech firm on the coast at that time, on the West Coast. And this happened everywhere I went. I ended up on a 10-year agency, I guess, experience. And so for whatever reason, the owners of these agencies turned me into the new business person as well. And so at that first agency in Boulder, Metzger Associates, I became the media relations director and a new business director within like the same week. And in order to train me, they sent me to the Dale Carnegie Sales School, which sounds absolutely so cheesy. And quite honestly, it is kind of cheesy, but coming from the service side instead of the product side, it required an act of empathy. And one of the main tenets of that school is empathy, because you can't sell something to somebody if you don't understand what they want to buy. So
Right.
our job here is to help people understand why they want to engage with the products or the services that our clients sell. And so we have to know what the audience on the other side is looking for, not just the journalist. We have to really understand what everybody's looking for, try to. And, 15 years ago, that was really hard. Today, it's a little easier because we have so much data. We have a generative search emerging that's producing results that make a lot more sense to us as PR people than I think what we see on Google. And so that I see Chat GPT as almost like an empathetic platform. Hate to say that, but
What do you what do you mean by that, Reid? Like a tool for empathy or like a truly empathetic platform?
as if its own, well, it is listening, it's scraping, and it's pulling from the sources that we're pushing out there. Mostly, I think 35% of it's coming from journalism, and another 30% is coming from company blogs and stuff like that. And so it's being able to work with a platform and have it change over time. I have a building client that was in Christopher Mims' Wall Street Journal column last March. And the way he described that company is now how we describe that company. And if you look on Chat GPT and you do a search for that company, that's the first thing that comes up, is how they're solving a $25 billion energy issue in the United States. And so that is an empathetic platform, I think. I think it's workable. I think we can work with it. It's listening, it's paying attention. Is it going to always give us what we want on the PR realm? I don't know. I can't see the future, but I can see what we have right now. And it's an opportunity, and it's a big opportunity for companies to start shaping who they are on a fairly quick basis by engaging PR, whether it's on a national level, industry level, or a local level, or all three. Like, this is there and it's available to us. And so, yeah, I look at empathy maybe differently than others because I can see it in products. I see it in nature. I see it in different places. But to apply it to a business strategy is extremely important, because I don't feel like we can really accommodate anything between humans without that.
Reid, the way you phrased some of your perspective on empathy, I found really interesting, because you sort of personify the company or the product as being empathetic. And I don't think that I did that. I think it takes the person to infuse that level of empathy into the organization or its product. And I think about a pharmaceutical company, for instance, and how is this giant corporate entity supposed to be empathetic when it's really us as the communicators that are writing that story that's infusing that empathy into them. But if the persona of the organization, whether it's pharma or tech or really anything, is what do you, the stakeholder, what do you, the customer, need from me, the organization, then I think maybe we as communicators can do more to help our companies and our clients be perceived as empathetic, which is what the customers and stakeholders on the other end really want to see from us.
I feel
Agree
like
with
you're
that. And
both-
two, go ahead, Lizzy.
I just think you're both talking. I think it's interesting. And I do think that there's a place for empathy within product and development and things like that. But we're talking about selective empathy toward a greater gain, right? Which I don't necessarily think is empathy. That's like a calculating tool. If you're only using empathy to your benefit, and of course, like the benefit of your stakeholders, whoever they may be, that's not empathy. That's strategy, right? Like if you're not listening to your stakeholders and what they need to get better, that's just bad business. But I don't think it's empathy.
Yeah, and so like I said, I might look at empathy different than others, where I actually do see that as empathy, because I consider my strategy empathetic in all facets. And so if I can't understand my clients, I can't understand their story and can't communicate that to someone on the other side who I really need to understand, I'm lacking in empathy. And so it is a strategy. You're right. It's crossed over into that from I don't know if you call it a feeling or an emotion or or a
Well,
stance, like a stance in life, but it actually has become a strategy. And that is why we're talking about it today, because I don't think really it's been expressed this way before. And
well,
so
and
appreciate you bringing it up that way.
I'm going to pull up a definition here. Empathy, according to Merriam-Webster, is the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. So, Lizzy, I think you're raising a really good point here. Are we being empathetic, like in that organic human fashion, or are we just borrowing, a tool that we're adding to our business tool belt? And does it
I
make
feel
it
like so,
inauthentic?
Reid, the way you were talking about empathy in business, I completely agree with you, right? Like I have it, my team has it, my clients have it. But then you crossed over into talking about the LLMs and you said, I do think it's an empathy tool. And first and foremost, it's selectively empathetic. It doesn't pull from everything, right? Like empathy in and of itself, you can't be selective with it, right? Unless you're adding on to the end of that definition, like for capital gains. And so you're either empathetic or you're not. And if you're selectively empathetic, then that's just strategic, because you're doing it toward a greater gain at the end. The true kind of like inherent good within is lost if you're doing it only for gain, right? That almost becomes the antithesis of empathy, which is what? Manipulation, right? And so
Right.
I think products can be developed with empathy in mind, but we have to keep in mind the end goal. And like, especially with our team, when we're working with journalists, yeah, we want coverage, but we also want to be a source for that reporter. We want to be helpful to their agenda too. And sometimes that does benefit us, but not always, right? Like I'll see journalists' queries for stories and I'll reach out to someone who I've known for years who is not a client, right? Or maybe someone I saw in LinkedIn or someone I've met in Slack and they're not my client. I don't get anything for representing them, but I want to help the journalist out because we're all just out here doing our best. Like I think there's a difference between empathy and like a calculating business endeavor.
I don't
But
think
at the same time, like,
turn off.
go, Joshua.
I was going to say, Lizzy, I agree with your point in principle. I don't, however, think that you can completely turn off all sense of, well, whatever I do is going to be 100% altruistic and I will never benefit or gain. Because even if you, to your point, your analogy, you help out a reporter, down the road, you might benefit from that. 100% absolute empathy would completely eliminate even that potential to benefit. Is that realistic? And if you say, well, okay, then we're still being empathetic, we really are still giving something without the expectation of return, even if we get it. I think that's still empathy without turning off human reality of at some point we may benefit from our good deed.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a huge gray area of it. And I agree that I don't think any one good deed is entirely altruistic. I think humans are wired to do things for gain. That's how we've survived for so long. But I do think there's a difference between like conducting empathy and then empathetic platforms, if you will.
Yeah, and
I
there's
would agree with that. I think the personification of ChatGPT's search program and calling it empathetic is basically a reaction of 20 plus years in this business and working in top technology with different platforms and things and trying to draw some sort of humanistic quality out of that feature or that platform or piece of software. And so forgive me for driving it down that lane. But as far as my empathy goes across the board, I can't get away from it. I'm stuck with it.
Sure.
And so I am an empathetic character. I do believe in exactly what you said. And so I am trying to get coverage for my clients. I'm also trying to help those journalists that we work with win an award, or, how can we make this the best story possible? What do I need to do to make that happen for you? And if that means maybe getting out of the way and not controlling the process so much when it's a dicey situation or a dicey interview, that's what I have to do. I will do it. And so I am very conscious of what their needs are in addition to my clients, because obviously you're going to be dealing with your clients' needs all day long. But like I said, you can't make a sale, you can't pitch a story and get it accomplished if you don't have real empathy. And so, yeah, personification of ChatGPT, I think that was probably a first today. And it's on record that I did it. And sure, that might be embarrassing, but I'm not embarrassed.
Reid, do you
Well, I mean, I'm the one who yelled at my kids, so we're two of us have already. Lizzy
I'm
and
really
Joshua
curious,
next.
Reid, your experience with LLMs and how you were talking about them being empathetic. I don't know if you saw the recent story about OpenAI being sued because a young, I believe it was a teenager, unfortunately committed suicide after being motivated by ChatGPT. And to me, as soon as you started talking about it, it made me recollect that story, because that would seem to be the opposite of empathy. So the question becomes, if LLMs are learning from us as humans, are we truly empathetic if that's what ChatGPT is doing and what it's resulting in for another human being?
That's frightening. Honestly, I hadn't heard about that case.
It's
Yeah, it
unfortunate.
was last week,
It kind
right?
of derails us from the topic, but it just seems so germane to what you were talking about.
Well, I personally tried to avoid jumping into AI for as long as possible. But then I saw what Lizzy and her team are doing on LinkedIn, and some of the information they're putting out is extremely helpful. And it just kind of drove me into that arena. And I started exploring, and they're right. They're absolutely right. And then the Muckrack report came out that actually showed the data behind what's happening with OpenAI. And with ChatGPT and generative search. And it's, like I said, I think we're positioned nicely in PR right now. And it's kind of like, it's not a first, but it's a nice place to be. And so thanks, Lizzy, for all the research that you guys have done so far and for jumping out early, because you really got me into it. And so it's yeah.
Well, and here's the thing too. For me, I've never thought of myself as an empathetic person. I like people. I'm a kind person. But there were many people in college. One guy in particular said that he would have hurt me because I was so abrasive sometimes. I wasn't naturally understanding. He was a well-intentioned person, but there was more of a battering ram than a key approach to life. And I wrote about this actually recently for, I think it was O'Dwyer's. And it was part of my explanation that like we really have to sometimes just stand back and breathe. And that for me was actually the biggest, where I made the biggest gains in empathy, was stepping back and saying, instead of doing the thing and then kind of figuring it out as I went, it was more step back and observe. And I forget who it was, maybe it was Joshua Reid, I forget who it was yesterday, who said, kids really help you with empathy. That's when I started realizing, oh, my kid is yelling. Why is my kid yelling? It's not because they want to put a megaphone to my face. It's because they have a need. And so being able to apply that to clients, we're all just children emotionally. So being able to apply that to clients or to a journalist and say, this journalist might be afraid they're going to lose their job this week. How can I make their job easier? How can I make sure that they get a paycheck this month? That hit me a couple years ago, and that's really driven a lot of how I approach editors, journalists, and producers, is help them keep their job this week. I think that's an example of empathy as well.
Yeah, I mean, what do we do in communications? We help people solve problems, whether it's the problem that the company is facing or the problem that the company's customer is facing. We help people solve other people's most pressing problems. And the way we do that is figuring out what do they need from us being the company. That's curiosity and empathy kind of rolled up into a beautiful little package. And we ask probing questions and we gain insights. I could be talking about curiosity, but in a different context, I could also be reciting the steps of how do we build a communication strategy, because they're really one and the same.
Right. Well, one thing we haven't really talked about clients, we talked about the communicators, but Lizzy and I, you and I both run companies. And how do you apply curiosity and empathy in either building the team or keeping the team motivated and building a strong culture?
Yeah, I mean, it's imperative, right? So before we bring anybody on full time, we have them fill out a questionnaire, sort of like the things that they like and don't like, and what sort of they want to see in this role, what drives them, what stifles them. And I pay a lot of attention to that, right? So one of the newest girls that we just brought on came from a big agency, and her biggest driving thing was, I really like to celebrate the little wins. Like it's important to me that those be acknowledged and not just the huge momentous things. And that really struck me because, when you're running a business, you could have 100 little wins a day. But they all feel kind of small, right? Because one, they're happening all the time, and because two, there's so many, and there's also bigger wins to be had. And so that really made me step back a little bit and start to focus on celebrating everyone's little wins. Right. A lot of my team members have kids, and so schedules require a lot of attention and in and out and things like that. I think it's just, we're just people, right? Dealing with other people, whether we're working with them, whether we're working for them. And at the end of the day, people just want to be respected. They want to be able to do what they want with their personal time. And that's really kind of it, right? Like everyone has to make money because of the world that we live in. But I've found that when you respect people's values and you respect people's time, that goes far and beyond really any benefit you could ever provide. And so I think it comes into, it plays a tremendous role in not only hiring, but like really every single day running the team. What matters to the team members, what drives them, what makes them feel motivated, and really, capitalizing on the former and really trying to minimize the latter, because they're just people. Everyone's just doing their best, trying to make through the day.
I found the same thing because I remember the first time I hired somebody, it was 2020. I put out a little job posting, which I'd never done before. And I put, looking for someone for a long-term, contractor role. I can't tell you how many people were referred to me or saw it. They reached out and I interviewed them, and they all said, a huge percentage of them said, "Oh, I'm in between jobs. I can do this for like a month." Okay, did you miss the words long term in this? And at the time, I felt kind of insulted. And looking back, I can see that maybe they were desperate or whatever, but they were lacking empathy for the fact that they were interviewing for a job. So when we interview people, we look to fill a seat, create a seat for the right person. Because if we're just jamming someone into a role, that doesn't show any empathy or curiosity for them in the slightest. That just means we're doing our own self-centered needs, and it's probably going to work out worse for everybody.
I also think it's like almost impossible to experience empathy when you're in a place of fear or defense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those emotions are completely conflicting. And if you're in a state of fight or flight, which I think a lot of people are, especially if they're between jobs,
Yeah,
cortisol levels have been high for weeks, maybe months, hopefully not, but
sure.
years. It's impossible to be empathetic and
That's a good point.
calm when you're in a state of fear and defense. And so those people, good on them for even trying to make it work for a month, but that's a survival tactic. And like empathy and
Right.
survival in the Venn diagram of things, there is absolutely no overlap.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I had a bunch of mentors kind of take me down a notch in 2019 because I was so desperate for work
Yeah.
because we had our second child on the way that four people literally said, people at this group that I was part of don't want to talk to you right now, Dustin. Like, you
No.
really got to drive everybody away. And I took that to heart, and I grew up. And 5 months later, several people told me, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. It's working. These are the same people. Because
That's
I had to
really
realize that my desperation was making my personality the wrong kind of battering ram.
sure.
So to your
I think
point,
it's a
Lizzy.
sign of great emotional intelligence when you're in the position that Lizzy was just describing, where you actually are the one that needs something, but you can turn the tables and genuinely ask the other person, what do you need from me? Even though you're the one that really is in a position of need. And, for a job seeker, it's a great analogy. They need the job, they need the money, they need
Right.
stability. But if you can turn it around to empathize with the employer, what problem can I help you solve? All of a sudden, you become the hero.
Huge. Really good point.
Yeah. But that's a hard skill. It's not easy. It's something that you can't just say, oh, I'm going to do this today. It really does take a lot of practice. I think it goes back to that nature versus nurture discussion from earlier.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Is it possible that, a certain percentage of people just don't have that natural curiosity or empathy, but they still enjoy, say, the doing things in PR? They enjoy writing, but they're more designed like, again, like I was in my 20s, where I know how to write an op-ed. You asked me to write anything besides an op-ed that had an argument at the top, 3 proving points, and a really good close. I didn't know how to write outside of that. I had to really learn a lot over the years. And I think it was a lot of hard lessons for me because I was naturally oriented toward the goal, not toward that empathy and curiosity as sort of active conscientiousness. So how do we teach people to get there?
I think so. I mean, they also have to want it, right? Like you have to,
Sure.
empathy requires vulnerability in some capacity, and a lot of people have been raised to conceal vulnerability. For a lot of people, especially like millennials and older, that was maybe a sign of weakness, and it was not met with a positive reaction. And so, if you've been taught to stifle something your entire life, you still have the
Good
capacity to
point.
learn it. But I think a lot of people maybe aren't inherently empathetic. I wouldn't go as far as to say most, but I'm sure if people had to fend for themselves more than others as a child, if like their parents weren't around, like if you had to grow up really quick, empathy and
Yep.
vulnerability are probably not things that you're really leaning on. Um, and I think, like I said earlier, like you can't really be empathetic when you're in a state of like fear or defense. So you have to be in a good place in order to be able to see where someone else is coming from. And for some people, that doesn't happen for the first time until they're, in their 30s or 40s. And so
Right.
something you have to seek and something you have to want. I don't think if it's something that you stifled your entire life that you're just gonna wake up with one day. But you would hope that everyone has the opportunity to feel comfortable enough at some point in their life to be vulnerable and empathetic and curious.
It's an interesting question that you raised, Dustin. It's deep into the roots of human psychology, which I personally really enjoy. I don't know that you can teach empathy as an overarching skill, but I do think that you can teach the foundational elements that if you master all of those, then you can become empathetic almost by default. Like, for instance, I think one of the guiding principles of somebody that is truly empathetic is making the other person feel important. If you genuinely care about what someone else has to say, how they feel about something, what they want, what they need, then you're making them feel important. You're more interested in learning about them than teaching them about you. That's a core principle of being empathetic. And the other piece of it, at least in my opinion, is listening with intent. Really mirroring someone's feelings, reflecting what you heard, understanding what they need from you. If you can do all of those things and put it together naturally so it doesn't feel like you're following some sort of empathy checklist, then you become empathetic by default. But I don't know that you can teach those skills. I still go back to you learn that from early on in childhood, and you either are developed with that because your parents have developed you that way or you're not.
Yeah, I don't know that you can teach empathy. I think it's something you can learn on your own. With employees that I've worked with before in the past, it's usually an exercise in providing complete autonomy to those employees and not giving them a sink or swim option, but someone like me to come back to with questions. And if the questions need to drive towards empathetic situations, then I'm not going to teach them how to be empathetic. I'm going to teach them how to research that target's last 2 years of stories and find the nuggets in each story that form a common thread that's going to allow them to pitch that person successfully. That if they don't succeed, it's not the end of the job. It's not going to be a firing situation. It's a learning situation. And so, yeah, I think you can teach the aspects of empathy,
Yeah.
but I don't think you can actually teach empathy itself. I think maybe you're born with it, or you gain it as you go through life and you see different situations and live through different situations. But teaching it is impossible. And you asked about different roles in PR, and there's so many different possible roles that are out there that I personally couldn't teach. One of my favorite employees is now at WagEd, and former employees, and there was no way to classify what she did. She wasn't a media relations person. She wasn't an account manager. She was just like this amazing glue that held all the teams together because she could do data research and she could do things on LinkedIn that no one else could do, and still can't do. And so she was a champion, and I watched her grow, and it was amazing watching her grow. And I think empathy was a big piece of what she did, because she had to understand what everybody's teams were doing inside that agency, and that's really unusual and that's really difficult. But she made it look easy. So there's plenty of roles out there outside of what the traditional ones are in this business.
Yeah, I think it's possible to teach someone how to like see it from someone else's perspective or put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think empathy inherently is you're really feeling what that person feels, you're experiencing what that person experienced. And that requires, you know, Joshua, like you were saying, like such a high EQ and so much compassion. And I don't really think those things can be taught.
Earlier. But I think a lot of times, Lizzy, you talk about generational, so sort of older millennials and people older than that. I'm turning 40 in a couple of weeks. So from my age and older, maybe we're told keep your emotions in more. But I think there's also for people under the age of, say, 35, is this sort of, with the word love, there are four kinds of love, but the kind of love you have for your spouse and your kids doesn't always have to have an emotional component attached to it, but we often associate it with emotions. And I think as we've all been talking here, I've had to come to realize, I think that components of empathy can be taught. You can't teach someone, obviously, like you can't shove a definition into somebody or shove that characteristic, but I think you can show somebody with the way that their brain is developed, their experiences have been developed, so they understand what it is and they can understand. And again, in my case, I can't empathize directly with a mother of children, but I can observe it. I can say, there before the grace of God go I when they're in difficult circumstances, and they're in a difficult circumstance. Or a colleague of mine, they had put their cat down recently, so I canceled the meeting we had that morning. I can't empathize with that exactly, but I shared that when my dog died, family dog died in 2012, I bought $1,000 ticket to see him the one last time. I don't know if that's empathy or not. I just wanted her to know that I've been there. But that was for my brain. Like, that's calculation. My brain goes, she feels this way. I think I've experienced that before. Let me do that to show sympathy. Even if it doesn't completely land, it will show that I care. The fact that it's a calculation for me and not sort of some intuition has often made me think I'm lacking empathy. So I wonder if it can be taught, because everyone's just different. And I wonder sometimes if we think empathy has to have this emotional component to it, much like the word love is often misunderstood.
I mean, it clearly can be taught. You understand it, right? Like, but you cannot
I don't know.
teach
I don't
someone
really
to
know.
feel what other people feel. I think that like you can teach compassion and you can teach sympathy. But I think like the emotional intelligence that it requires to truly be empathetic, I don't think that you can teach it. I also don't think that everyone needs to be empathetic to be a good person, right? Like I think I think it's important to show grace and compassion and kindness and understanding and sympathy, and all of those things are incredible. Like, I don't think you necessarily need to feel what someone else is feeling in order to care for them and be like a good, caring human. You get it. Clearly, I don't know what you feel and what you think, but ultimately, I just do not. I think it's something you either have or you don't.
Yeah, I think, you know, Dale Carnegie for $29.99 per class is really working hard to try and teach people empathy. And of the 30 plus students that were in the class with me, I didn't feel a whole lot of empathy from them on my final pitch. And so I don't think you can teach it. I think you're born with it or you learn it through experience. And so empathy can also be taken away through experiencing things
Definitely.
and
Yeah,
through
that's a
life.
good
And
point.
so there's a certain
Yeah.
subset of personalities that have no empathy and will never have empathy. And so do they want it? Maybe they do. I don't know. But the fact is that not everybody has it. It's not something that's easy to come by. You actually have to pay attention to it. You have to pay attention to the things and the people around you to enjoy it and to help people with it. So I've worked with a lot of people that aren't empathetic. It didn't make them bad at their jobs, though. It actually made them probably more effective than some others. But in our job and what we do, it is important because we have so many constituents to please. And to actually consider before we even open our mouths or pick up the phone or send a text or an email that we're not going to send something that's going to turn them off, that we're going to send something that they want because we know what they want. And empathy is certainly kindness, but we talked about this before, and I think the last session that the art of war is empathy. Sun Tzu's art of war is understanding who you
Yeah.
are, what your capabilities are, and then what the other side is capable of, and what they can do, and how you can defeat them. So, yeah, that's, I mean, it's kind of a disgusting reference for empathy, but it is actual
No, it's
empathy.
true.
And the
No, it's a good point.
definition, it fits into it. So it's not always sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes it's getting down to the nitty gritty and figuring out what needs to be done for the client, for the journalist, whoever it is, and leaving your preconceived notions behind and just going for it. And so that to me is empathy because you're not worrying about yourself, you're worrying about someone else, and mostly your client and the journalist, at least in my case.
I think in the work that we do, empathy is such a large part of relating to the people we serve, not just internally, our comms teams, our broader colleagues across an organization, but externally, like in healthcare comms, I deal with a lot of patients and I get direct engagement with people who have the kinds of problems I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. People who are truly sick and truly don't have a chance. And I couldn't do my job without not only empathy, not only curiosity, but just human kindness and sympathy and feeling. And those again are going back to the earlier conversation. I don't think those are things that you could teach, but without them, I also don't think that you could really succeed in the job. Now, could I write a press release or a customer story about these people without empathy? Probably yes. But the people that read that, I think they would see that it was false. I think they would see it was disingenuous and thinking like a storyteller. I don't know that I could connect those dots as well if it wasn't truly empathetic and coming from a place of, I understand where this person is and I can relate to how they feel and translate that into the written piece of content or the key message or whatever I have the CEO of the company say.
I totally agree, Joshua. And I think that really like illuminates an interesting point, which I hadn't thought of, in which, you know, journalists and reporters inherently are so curious. They have to be in order to do that job. Right. And so I think working with those types of people, the people within that profession, that's really important to understand when you're working with them, is that they're probably almost all of them inherently, all of them are curious, and probably a high percentage of them are empathetic. And so working with them, sort of putting yourself in their shoes and understanding that, I think that's really interesting.
Make the job of a journalist, the more success you're going to have. And so we do a lot of op-eds, but when we do the interviews, sometimes we provide our client as an interview source, but also 3 other people in our network who are not clients. And we give them the 3 studies they need to start from. Oh, and by the way, this is not exactly related, but this is another thing you need to be aware of, because we're being, to that point about empathy, so that their job is easier. They can be curious, but quickly curious, so they're not wasting a lot of time in a very busy job where their paycheck is at risk. So let's spend about 10 minutes here. I think we have about 10 minutes left to dive into curiosity. We really haven't talked about that very much. One of the things I talked to Sarah Kisco-Hirsch and Michelle Andrade about is sometimes you're really excited, you're passionate about the topic or the company or something, the mission of the organization you're working with. And sometimes you're not. Sometimes it's just a job. So let's talk about curiosity from a getting yourself excited about something that you're not inherently passionate about. So again, I used the example of the financial lender earlier. I became really excited about that client because they were helping small business owners succeed and not just fall flat on their back and go bankrupt. But it took curiosity, and it took a while for me to dig deep and figure that out. So I'd love to hear how you all think through for yourselves or for your teams on how curiosity can help you get past something you're not inherently excited about, whether it's the mission, the product, the specific campaign, etc.
I think if you're not curious, you're uninformed. And if you're saying you're not curious because you're uninformed, you're ignorant. I truly think like every space, every industry, every company, every person is so interesting if you really understand it and you dig into kind of the ethos of it, the origin of it, who's involved in it, who the stakeholders are. I think all of that is interesting. And if you were going to say that like a business isn't, especially something like financial lending, we're talking like trillions and trillions of dollars. It's like, well then you're just ignorant, right?
Sure.
I think curiosity, it also isn't linear. It doesn't have to be an A to B equation, meaning I don't necessarily need to be passionate about the topic to be curious. So for instance, Dustin, if you're into, I'm making this up, but if you're into cryptocurrency and I have zero interest in that, if I need to write about it because you're my client, the question I might ask you is, why are you passionate about it? What you're proud of about it? And that might be a way to elicit the information I need to do my job as a communicator and storyteller without necessarily having the passion on my own. And I'm still genuinely curious because you're a friend, you're a colleague, and I want to know what makes you tick. So I'm asking you the question with genuine sincerity. Why do you love cryptocurrency if that's the topic at hand? And that I think is curiosity. It helps me do my job without necessarily having to be interested in everything, because who's interested in absolutely everything on earth? We don't have time for that, but we can understand why someone else is interested in it and be equally curious.
I'm lucky in that I get to work with a lot of innovators and scientists and technologists who are continually coming up with things that blow my mind. I'm a dork at heart. And so if you walk me into a window manufacturing plant and start to show me what's happening in that plant, and there's automation and there's this crazy gels and things built into the actual windows themselves, improving the insulation and the clarity, you got me. I'm all in. There's no lack of curiosity in any of my clients. I look at all of my clients as experts in what they do and want to position them as experts. And so if I don't believe in them, I can't convince someone else to believe in them. I have to believe in them too. And so authenticity and transparency become a big piece of the puzzle, because I like to sit down with said experts, said scientists, over lunch or over an hour meeting and pick their brain and let them allow me to fail in my questions. Let me be stupid up front and ask the dumb questions so that I don't do that later when I'm working with a journalist. So I can fully understand and like translate that story to a layman audience. That's a skill, and that's hard, and it takes a lot of practice. That again takes empathy and curiosity. I think both of those have to be in place in order to be successful there. And a lot of times some of these folks are intimidating. And so to take away the intimidation factor, you focus on the curiosity, focus on what those things are that you want to learn about that product or service or thing, and really dig in with that person and get to understand them and who they are and why they're a thought leader. That's another piece of the puzzle. Why is this person a thought leader? How can I position them? Who am I going to position them in front of? But right now they're sitting in front of me, just blowing my mind. And this needs to be shared externally. So how do we do that strategically? And that's, for me, the biggest win in PR is being able to sit with some of these people and get to understand what they know. And I think I said to you, Dustin, one of my strategies on a highest level is to take someone who's incredibly intelligent, put them in a room with someone else who's incredibly intelligent, and give them something really cool to talk about and watch what happens and what comes out of that. And so I feel lucky and privileged that I do get to work with really intelligent people, and I get to engage with really intelligent journalists. And I actually get to sit there and watch the whole thing and learn from it. And that's an experience most people don't get. It's fascinating. And so the curiosity is very high, and it leads to more, and it just leads to more understanding and more learning and more empathy.
I love that perspective so much, Reid. And the way you framed it, it's like data that fuels what we do as communicators. We're eliciting because we know how to ask the probing questions, and we know what kinds of insights will inform what equates to a good output for our work. And the more probing questions you ask, the more that you can discover. That just improves what it is we do. And your point about putting two smart people in the room and letting them just be smart together, it just makes our job so much more easy when we can think in those terms.
Great.
How challenging, but there's a piece of technology that you and your team don't yet understand, and this firm or the prospect thinks we already know everything, right? We all get asked, so do you know my industry? Do you know this vertical, this niche? How do you use curiosity to ask the right questions in a way that also earns that trust?
Is that for Lizzy or for me?
It was ordered to Lizzy, but anyone can answer.
Oh, I didn't hear the beginning of the question.
I
Oh,
didn't
sorry.
What was it?
Did I cut out?
Yeah.
All right. So, you work with tech companies, right, Lizzy? And so I'm sure there's on a regular basis, there's people coming to you and saying, we need help, and they expect you to know everything about their little niche or their product or their competition. How do you ask questions that allow these people, to use Reid's phrase, mind-blowing technology, but they're only experts in that technology or that company? They're not experts in what we do. How do you use curiosity to get the answers that you need to know if they're a good client while also making sure that that builds trust?
Like ahead of signing them?
Correct.
I research, I read, I listen. I probably read 30 newsletters every single day. I'm like constantly listening and reading news and podcasts and things like that. And I very rarely have a client come in that I don't already understand their industry. I've been doing this long enough that I can get a pretty good gut check within the first 5 minutes if this is going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
I think it doesn't necessarily have to do with understanding the ins and outs of their industry. It goes back to what we talked about in the very beginning of this, was that they're people, right? They're people representing a business within an industry, but you're talking to the person. And that's all you have to remember. That what you really need to get to the nitty-gritty of is, what are you hoping to achieve, right? Like, what's a win for you? What makes you feel good about a relationship? Looking down the road in 90 days, what would make you feel like this was a success? You don't have to understand quantum computing to be able to ask those questions, right? You have to understand the person that's representing the business within the industry. And so I typically understand all the industries that my clients work in and the target clients that come in, but it really has nothing to do with that. It has to do with being curious as a person about what's going to drive this other person. Oftentimes the person that you're talking to has someone above them who may even have someone above them who has goals and metrics and KPIs and things that you have to achieve. And those questions are really industry agnostic, right? Understanding where they're coming from, why they're coming from the place that they are, and what they need from you to achieve those goals. That's really the question at hand. It almost has nothing to do with the tech.
Yeah, I think the same truth applies in healthcare. There's so many different diseases and so many different ways that those diseases can be treated, from different scientific applications, different platform technologies. Cancer alone is such a fascinating space with so many different ways of attacking tumors or stopping them from reproducing carcinogens. And you don't need to understand how all of those work. And I don't know that a layperson really
Right.
can. But when I go into a new client engagement, I start with figuring out what problem needs to be solved and why is it a problem and what's the impact if it's not solved. And I'll look at what's been tried before and why did those things fail? What's the barriers to success? And in those questions, I can usually get the insights to shape the framework of the story to set up the problem and demonstrate why my client or company has the solution.
And I think I got lucky. I had a really good mentor early on in my career, and he's, one of the top 50 PR people in the world right now, and he's based in Denver. Um, we had a meeting where he led the meeting, and we were meeting with GE Access, and he knew every question to ask. He knew that at the end of the day, GE is a finance company, not a appliance company. And that moment, that was like the spark that went off in my head. I was like, I need to be more like Patrick. I need to do the homework up front before I sit down with a potential client to really understand the ins and outs of their story and what they're trying to achieve from a big picture standpoint. And so that's not an easy skill to learn. And it is something that it takes practice. It just takes practice, and you have to get better and better at it. But like I said, I was fortunate to see it at work early in my career, and try and mimic and model that going forward.
I think that's a really good point too, Lizzie, that you're focusing on people. Whether you are dating, bumping into somebody on the street, married, or doing business, it's all about people. And so I think that you're wise to advise everyone, do the research and use it to apply to people. Don't use it to think too much about the tech, but use it to show that the people that you care about them, that you've empathetically prepared for the meeting to respect their time as well.
I mean, if you go into a meeting and you understand the tech and you leave the meeting and you don't understand their goals, that's a big failure, right? They're not hiring you to develop their tech. They're hiring you to talk about it, and
Right.
their stakeholders and target stakeholders will care about that. And so it's just so deeply important to understand where people are coming from. Tech is just like, the lens. But behind it is just people trying to meet metrics, trying to achieve goals, right? So
Right.
People and use cases.
yeah.
So I need to jump. So let's wrap up here. What's the most important thing you want people to take away about curiosity and empathy in PR? Let's go in reverse from earlier. I think we ended with Reid last time.
It really comes down to caring about your clients, caring about what you do as a practitioner, and caring about what the person on the other side that you're going to work with wants to do, or what their desires are, and understanding all three facets of that. And so curiosity leads you into it, but empathy, I think, is what pulls you out and helps you with the success meter.
Joshua?
I think for me, empathy and curiosity come together in the philosophy that I was taught from a young age, which is to make people feel important and show them that you genuinely care. And if you're asking questions that you truly want to hear the answers to, then you're being curious and empathetic. The other great thing I learned, the lesson in curiosity that I take with me into any storytelling engagement, is a quote by Albert Einstein: "I have no special talent. I'm only passionately curious." And if you think about who said that, Einstein, obviously he had some pretty significant talents as a thinker, as an inventor, but his curiosity is what got him into those places. So I look at that quote as sort of a guidepost to being a curious soul that gets me into the passion that I feel for the work that I do every day.
Yeah. And I think, not everyone has empathy. I don't think it's required to do a good job in this industry, but I think you can always be curious and you can always be looking for ways to see things from a different perspective. And I think that's really the key to all of it, right? Put yourself in someone else's shoes, understand their perspective, where they're coming from, why they may be coming from that place, and you'll find success.
And for anyone who's struggling with this, Chris Voss literally wrote the book on negotiation. The entire book is built around empathy. It's built around active listening. It's built around not having an ego. It's built around making sure that you are listening to what people are really saying beneath the surface. So Chris Voss, his 2016 book, Never Split the Difference,
Right.
is phenomenal. It not only, I read it originally as a sales book, not realizing yes, he wrote it for the business audience, but it is just a phenomenally helpful book if you want to learn how to be a better listener and ask questions that really create connection. And so for me, I think we're at curiosity and empathy. You can be curious. I've always been a very curious person, but I didn't always have the empathy to realize when curiosity became, say, I don't know, interrogation. And things like this until my early 30s. And again, having several children, starting a business right before my first kid was born, I'd worked from home for years. It was probably detrimental to my social growth. So having little kids and starting my company really accelerated my learning. And so now I'm much better at asking questions, but also then reframing the Chris Voss style, pausing once in a blue moon to let other people talk. Things like this that actually create that empathetic connection. So that would be my big takeaway is curiosity can bring you to the surface, but empathy is what allows that to build a relationship. So, folks, this was great. This was a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Dustin.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.